The phone call that shattered my heart came on a Tuesday morning while I was arranging fresh daisies in my favorite crystal vase. My son Marcus's voice was cold, distant, nothing like the little boy who used to climb into my lap for bedtime stories. "Mom, about your birthday party this weekend," he said, his tone already telling me everything I needed to know. "Jessica and I have been talking, and honestly, we think it's better if we cancel it. Nobody really wants to be there anyway. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Nobody wants you there." Those 5 words echoed in my mind long after he hung up, each one cutting deeper than the last. At 75 years old, I thought I'd heard every cruel thing life could throw at me. I was wrong. What my son didn't know, what nobody in my small town of Riverside knew, was that his mother, Angel Martinez, had a secret that would change everything. A secret so big, so life-altering, that when the truth finally came out, it would flip our entire family dynamic upside down. My name is Angel Martinez, and if you saw me walking down Main Street in Riverside, you'd probably think I was just another elderly widow trying to make ends meet. My graying hair was always pulled back in a simple bun, my clothes were clean but clearly from discount stores, and my small 2-bedroom house on Maple Street had seen better days. The white paint was peeling slightly around the window frames, and my old Honda Civic had over 200,000 miles on it. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up at 6:30 without an alarm, a habit I'd developed during my 40 years working at the county clerk's office. My joints would protest as I swung my legs over the side of my narrow bed, reminding me that 75 years of life had taken their toll. But I'd learned long ago that complaining never changed anything, so I'd simply take my time getting dressed and head to the kitchen. The kitchen was the heart of my modest home, with its outdated appliances and worn linoleum floor. The refrigerator hummed loudly, a sound I'd grown so accustomed to that silence would have felt strange. I'd make my coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for the past 15 years, a souvenir from a long-ago trip to the Grand Canyon that Marcus had taken me on when he still seemed to enjoy my company. My daily routine was predictable, some might say boring. After coffee, I'd tend to my small garden behind the house. Nothing fancy, just tomatoes, peppers, and herbs that helped stretch my grocery budget. The neighbors often complimented my green thumb, not knowing that gardening had become both therapy and necessity over the years. The mailman, Jerry, always stopped to chat when he delivered my letters, mostly bills and advertisements, occasionally a postcard from my friend Betty, who lived 3 houses down. Betty and I had been friends since our children were small, bonding over playground conversations, and shared worries about making ends meet as single mothers. People in Riverside knew me as the quiet woman who volunteered at the food bank every Thursday, who never missed Sunday service at St. Mary's, and who always had a kind word for everyone she met. They saw someone who shopped carefully with coupons, who drove the same car year after year, who lived simply and without complaint. What they didn't see was the woman who lay awake some nights, staring at the ceiling and wondering how her relationship with her only child had become so strained. Marcus had moved to Denver 5 years ago after marrying Jessica, a successful marketing executive with expensive tastes and even more expensive opinions about what constituted a proper lifestyle. During their rare visits, I could see Jessica's eyes scanning my living room with barely concealed disapproval. She'd make comments about the furniture being outdated, about how I should consider moving somewhere more modern, somewhere with better amenities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus would nod along, agreeing with his wife while avoiding my eyes. The distance between us had grown slowly, so gradually, that I barely noticed it happening until it became a chasm I couldn't bridge. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits turned into brief, obligatory stops during holidays. My grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Tyler, knew me more through video calls than actual time spent together. I tried to understand. Marcus had worked hard to build a successful career as a financial advisor, and Jessica's marketing firm was thriving. They lived in a beautiful house in an upscale Denver neighborhood, drove new cars, and traveled to places I'd only seen in magazines. I was proud of what he'd accomplished, Truly, I was. But somewhere along the way, my simple life had become something he was embarrassed by. The morning Marcus called about canceling my 75th birthday party, I had been looking forward to it for weeks. It was going to be small, just family and a few close friends gathered in my backyard. Betty had offered to help with the cooking, and I'd even splurged on decorations from the dollar store. Nothing elaborate, but it would have been nice to celebrate another year of life surrounded by people I loved. I'd spent days planning the menu, choosing foods I knew Marcus and the children enjoyed. My famous chocolate chip cookies, the ones Marcus used to beg for as a child. Homemade tamales, a recipe passed down from my grandmother. A simple sheet cake from the grocery store, because I wanted to focus on spending time with my family rather than fussing in the kitchen. When the phone rang that Tuesday morning, I'd answered with excitement, expecting Marcus to confirm what time they'd arrive. Instead, his voice was flat, businesslike, as if he were canceling a dentist appointment rather than his mother's birthday celebration. "The thing is, Mom," he continued after delivering the devastating news, "Emma has a soccer tournament, and Tyler has a friend's party. Jessica's been stressed with work, and honestly, driving all the way to Riverside for a backyard party just doesn't make sense right now." I gripped the phone tighter, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "I understand the children have activities," I said carefully, "but it's my 75th birthday, Marcus. Couldn't we work around their schedules?" There was a pause, and I could hear Jessica's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. When Marcus spoke again, his tone had hardened. "Mom, you have to understand our position. We have responsibilities, commitments. We can't just drop everything for every little celebration. Every little celebration." My 75th birthday was a little celebration to him. "Besides," he continued, and I could hear Jessica more clearly now, obviously standing close to the phone, "it's not like you need a big party. You've got your church friends and Betty. They'll probably appreciate a quiet gathering more than we would anyway." The dismissal in his voice was unmistakable. They didn't want to be there because they didn't think I was worth their time. My simple life, my modest home, my humble celebrations weren't good enough for their sophisticated tastes. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the notes I'd made for the party planning. The guest list seemed pathetic now, just 8 names, including Marcus's family. The menu looked childish, like something an old woman who didn't know any better might plan. But then I remembered something my late husband Roberto used to say during our 38 years of marriage before cancer took him away. "Angel, am I amor? People show you who they are by how they treat you when they think you have nothing to offer them." Roberto had been a wise man, patient and kind, who saw the best in everyone, but was never naive about human nature. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet, pushing aside the simple dresses and practical shoes until I reached the back corner. There, in a small fireproof safe hidden behind winter coats I rarely needed in Riverside's mild climate, lay the truth about who Angel Martinez really was. Inside that safe were documents that would have shocked anyone who knew me as the humble widow living on a fixed income. Bank statements showing balances with more zeros than most people saw in a lifetime. Investment portfolios that had grown steadily over the years. Property deeds for land I'd inherited but never mentioned. And most importantly, the lottery ticket I'd bought on a whim 3 years ago. The one that had changed everything, but that I'd told no one about. $23 million. That's what I'd won when my numbers came up. Numbers I'd been playing for 15 years based on family birthdays and anniversaries. I'd taken the lump sum, paid the taxes, and invested wisely with the help of a financial advisor in Denver who had no idea I was Marcus's mother. For 3 years, I'd lived exactly as I had before, partly because I didn't need more than I had, and partly because I wanted to see who in my life loved Angel the person versus Angel the wealthy woman. The test had been more revealing than I'd ever imagined it would be. Marcus had failed spectacularly. As I sat there holding those documents, a plan began forming in my mind. If my son thought I wasn't worth celebrating, if he believed his mother was just an embarrassment he had to endure, then perhaps it was time for him to learn who he'd actually been dismissing all these years. My 75th birthday was still 5 days away. That gave me just enough time to plan a very different kind of celebration, one that would teach my family that assumptions could be dangerous things, and that the quiet woman they'd been taking for granted had a few surprises left in her. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never used. "Boulder Country Club," came the crisp, professional voice on the other end. "How may I help you?" "I'd like to book your private dining room for a birthday celebration this Saturday," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Money is no object." The conversation that followed was the first step in showing Marcus and Jessica that they'd made a terrible mistake in underestimating Angel Martinez. But more than that, it was the first step in reclaiming my own sense of worth and dignity. As I hung up the phone and began making a very different kind of guest list, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not just anger at being dismissed, but excitement about the future. For too long, I'd allowed other people's perception of me to define my reality. That was about to change in ways none of them could imagine. The woman who went to sleep that night was the same Angel Martinez who had woken up that morning. But she was also someone new. Someone ready to stop hiding and start living the life she'd earned through decades of hard work, careful saving, and one incredibly lucky lottery ticket. Saturday was going to be a birthday celebration none of us would ever forget. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The sting of Marcus's words still burned, but underneath that pain was something stronger, something that had been dormant for far too long. I made my coffee and sat at my kitchen table, not to read the newspaper or plan my garden work, but to make phone calls that would change everything. My first call was to Rosa Valdez, a woman I'd met at the church charity drive last year. Rosa ran a high-end catering company in Boulder, and when I'd complimented her elegant presentation at the fundraiser, she'd given me her card with a warm smile. "If you ever need anything special, Mrs. Martinez, you just call me." "Rosa, this is Angel Martinez from St. Mary's in Riverside," I began when she answered. "I wonder if you might be available for a rather urgent catering job this Saturday." "Of course, Mrs. Martinez. What did you have in mind?" "A 75th birthday celebration for about 40 guests. I'd like a sophisticated menu, nothing too heavy but elegant. Perhaps some of those beautiful hors d'oeuvres you made for the fundraiser, and a selection of wines. Can you handle something like that on short notice?" There was a brief pause. 40 guests is quite a jump from what we discussed at the church event. "May I ask what your budget range is for something like this?" "Whatever it takes to make it memorable," I said simply. "Let's say $15,000 to start, and we can adjust from there if needed." The silence on the other end stretched longer this time. When Rosa spoke again, her voice had taken on a much more professional tone. "Mrs. Martinez, I think we should meet in person to discuss the details. Would you be able to come to my office this afternoon?" After confirming the appointment, I hung up and smiled. Rosa's reaction told me everything I needed to know about how people would respond when they realized Angel Martinez had resources they hadn't expected. My second call was to Helen Blackwood, a woman I'd never met but whose name I'd found in Denver's social pages. Helen ran an exclusive event planning company that catered to the city's wealthy elite. Getting through to her directly took some persistence and the magic words, "unlimited budget." But eventually, I heard her cultured voice on the line. "Mrs. Martinez, I understand you're interested in our Platinum event services. Can you tell me more about what you're envisioning?" "A 75th birthday celebration that my family will never forget," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I want elegance, sophistication, and a guest list that will make people take notice. I'm thinking the Boulder Country Club's private dining room, with some special touches that will surprise everyone involved." The Boulder Country Club is an excellent choice. Their facilities are impeccable. When you say special touches, what exactly do you mean? I thought about Marcus's dismissive tone, about Jessica's barely concealed disgust with my modest lifestyle. I want to hire a string quartet, have professional photographers capture everything, and I'd like to arrange for some surprise entertainment. Perhaps that jazz singer I read about in the Denver Post, Carmen Silva. Helen's intake of breath was audible. Carmen Silva was one of the most sought-after performers in Colorado, someone who typically commanded five-figure fees for private events. "Mrs. Martinez, Carmen's calendar is usually booked months in advance, and her fees are quite substantial." "How substantial?" "For a private performance, you're looking at $25,000, plus travel and accommodation expenses." "Book her," I said without hesitation. "And I want everything else to match that level of quality. This needs to be an event that people will talk about for years." After finalizing the details with Helen, I made my third call, this one to my financial advisor in Denver. Robert Kim had been managing my lottery winnings for 3 years, helping me invest wisely while maintaining my secret. He'd always been professional but puzzled by my insistence on living so modestly despite my wealth. Mrs. Martinez, good to hear from you. How can I help you today? Robert, I need to access some funds for a personal event. About $50,000 should cover it, transferred to my checking account by tomorrow if possible. $50,000? That's quite a departure from your usual spending patterns. Is everything all right? I smiled, thinking about how many people had underestimated me over the years. Everything is perfect, Robert. I'm finally ready to start living a little. Well, it's about time, he said with a chuckle. I've been telling you for 3 years that you could afford to enjoy your wealth. The transfers will be completed by noon tomorrow. My fourth call was the most important one, and also the most satisfying. I dialed Marcus's number, knowing he'd be at work and likely to answer with that hurried, impatient tone he used when he was busy. Mom, I can't really talk right now. I'm in the middle of a client meeting. This will just take a minute, Mijo, I said, using the endearment I'd called him since childhood. I wanted to let you know that I understand about Saturday. You're right that a simple backyard party isn't really appropriate for the occasion. I could hear the relief in his voice. Oh, good. I was worried you might be upset. Not upset at all. In fact, I've decided to plan something more fitting for a 75th birthday. I'm having a celebration at the Boulder Country Club instead. There was a pause. The Boulder Country Club. Mom, that place is incredibly expensive. Are you sure you can afford something like that? I've been saving for a special occasion, I said truthfully. And what could be more special than celebrating 3/4 of a century of life with the people who matter most? Well, I suppose if you've been saving up. But Mom, the Boulder Country Club is pretty fancy. Maybe something more, more suitable would be better? More suitable. There was that condescension again, the assumption that his mother couldn't possibly belong in an upscale venue. I think it will be perfect, Marcus. I've already made all the arrangements for Saturday at 6 o'clock. I do hope you and Jessica and the children can make it. I don't know, Mom. Boulder is even farther than Riverside, and we still have those commitments I mentioned. I understand if you're too busy, I said, my voice calm and even. I'll just have to celebrate with the friends who do want to be there. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him thinking, probably wondering what his mother was up to. What friends? I mean, who else are you inviting? Oh, just some people I've gotten to know over the years. Betty, of course, and Rosa from the catering company. Helen, my event planner. Carmen Silva will be performing. A few others you probably wouldn't know. Carmen Silva? His voice had risen in surprise. Mom, how do you even know who Carmen Silva is? I may be 75, but I'm not dead, Marcus. I read the society pages. I know what's happening in the world. But Mom, someone like that probably costs a fortune. Are you sure you know what you're getting yourself into? There was genuine concern in his voice now, mixed with confusion. This wasn't the humble, penny-pinching mother he thought he knew. I'm quite sure, Mijo, everything is taken care of. I still think you should reconsider. Maybe something smaller, more intimate. You don't want to get in over your head financially. The only thing I'm reconsidering is whether there will be enough room at the table for people who don't really want to be there, I said, letting a slight edge creep into my voice. What's that supposed to mean? It means that this celebration is for people who value family, Marcus. People who understand that some things are more important than soccer tournaments and work stress. If you and Jessica decide that my 75th birthday is worth your time, you're welcome to join us. If not, I'll understand that you have more important priorities. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I'd just issued an ultimatum to my son, something I'd never done before. But more than that, I'd started to reclaim my voice, to demand the respect I deserved. Within an hour, my phone rang. Jessica's name appeared on the caller ID. Angel, it's Jessica. Marcus told me about your plans for Saturday. I have to say I'm a bit concerned. Concerned about what, Misha? I used the same endearment I'd used for Marcus, though Jessica had never seemed to appreciate it. Well, the expense, for one thing. The Boulder Country Club is extremely exclusive. I'm not sure you understand what kind of costs you're looking at. I appreciate your concern, but I assure you I can afford it. It's just that Marcus and I worry about you making impulsive financial decisions. At your age, you need to be careful with your money. Maybe we should sit down and go over your budget together. The condescension was thick in her voice, the assumption that I was a confused old woman who needed their guidance to manage my affairs. That's very thoughtful of you, Jessica, but I have excellent financial advice. Robert Kim in Denver has been helping me manage my portfolio for several years now. You have a portfolio? The surprise in her voice was unmistakable. Of course I do. Did you think I'd been stuffing my money under my mattress all these years? No, I just thought, well, on a county clerk's pension and Social Security, there wouldn't be much to invest. There are many things you don't know about me, Jessica, I said quietly. I'm looking forward to Saturday evening when you'll have a chance to learn more. About that, Angel, I'm not sure we'll be able to make it. The children really do have commitments, and the drive to Boulder is quite long. I understand. It's a shame, though. Carmen Silva doesn't perform for private parties very often. It would have been a wonderful opportunity for Emma and Tyler to experience world-class entertainment. Carmen Silva, the jazz singer? Angel, how on earth did you manage to book her? I made a phone call and wrote a check, I said simply. It's amazing what becomes possible when you stop limiting yourself. After Jessica hung up, promising to discuss the matter with Marcus, I felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I'd spoken to my daughter-in-law as an equal, not as the poor relation they reluctantly tolerated. The shift in dynamic was already beginning, and Saturday's event would complete the transformation. My afternoon appointment with Rosa went better than I could have hoped. Her catering office in Boulder was elegant and professional, with a portfolio of events that included some of the most exclusive parties in Colorado. When I walked in, wearing my simple dress and practical shoes, I could see her reassessing me, trying to reconcile the modest appearance with the budget I'd mentioned over the phone. Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming in. I have to admit, I was surprised by your call this morning. When we met at the church fundraiser, I got the impression you lived quite simply. I do live simply, by choice, I said. But simple living doesn't mean I lack resources. It means I prefer to spend my money thoughtfully. Rosa smiled, her professionalism taking over. Well, let's talk about making your 75th birthday unforgettable. I've put together some menu options based on our phone conversation. The next hour was a revelation. Rosa walked me through options I'd never considered, foods I'd only read about in magazines. We settled on a sophisticated spread that included everything from imported cheeses and artisanal breads to delicate seafood, hors d'oeuvre, and a wine selection that would impress even the most discerning palates. The total cost will be approximately $12,000 for 40 guests, Rosa said as we finalized the details. That includes service staff, all food and beverages, and the special birthday cake from our premier bakery. Perfect, I said, pulling out my checkbook. I'll pay half now and half on Saturday. Rosa's eyes widened as I wrote the check with steady hands. Mrs. Martinez, if you don't mind me asking, what's the occasion for such an elaborate celebration? I mean, beyond it being your birthday. I looked at her thoughtfully, considering how much to reveal. Let's just say it's time for some people in my life to see the real Angel Martinez. I've been hiding behind other people's expectations for too long. My evening meeting with Helen Blackwood was even more eye-opening. Her office in downtown Denver was the kind of place I'd walked past many times, but never imagined entering. Everything was sleek and modern, from the glass reception desk to the abstract art on the walls. Helen herself was exactly what I'd expected from her voice, impeccably dressed, perfectly coiffed, and clearly accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients. But like Rosa, she seemed puzzled by my appearance. Mrs. Martinez, I've been making calls all afternoon about your event. I have to say, your requests are quite ambitious for such short notice. Were you able to arrange everything? Actually, yes. Carmen Silva had a cancellation, so she's available. I've also booked the string quartet you requested, arranged for professional photography, and coordinated with the country club for floral arrangements and special lighting. The total cost will be $38,000, not including the catering. I nodded as if $38,000 was pocket change. That sounds reasonable. What else can we add to make it truly memorable? Helen leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. Well, there are always additional touches. Luxury transportation for your guests, perhaps? A champagne reception before dinner? Special gifts or favors? Let's do the champagne reception. As for transportation, that won't be necessary. My guests are quite capable of getting themselves to Boulder. We spent another hour refining details, and by the time I left Helen's office, I'd committed to spending nearly $50,000 on my birthday celebration. 3 days ago, that amount would have seemed impossible. Now it felt like the best investment I'd ever made. The drive home to Riverside gave me time to think about what I'd set in motion. In less than 4 days, I would host an event that would shock everyone who thought they knew me. Marcus and Jessica would see their modest, penny-pinching mother transformed into someone who could command the same level of luxury they'd always associated with their own social circle. But more than shocking them, I was finally honoring the woman I'd always been inside. The woman who'd worked hard, saved wisely, and deserved to be treated with respect and love, regardless of her bank balance. The woman who'd raised a son to be successful and kind, even if somewhere along the way he'd forgotten the lessons about kindness. That evening, Betty called as I was reviewing the final guest list I'd prepared. "Angel, honey, Marcus just called me." He sounded all confused and worried. "Something about you planning some fancy party at a country club? What's going on?" I smiled at Betty's direct approach. We'd been friends for too long to dance around subjects. "I'm planning a proper celebration for my 75th birthday. Something worthy of the occasion." "But honey, the Boulder Country Club? That place costs more for dinner than I spend on groceries in a month. How are you managing to afford something like that?" "Betty, what would you say if I told you I'd been keeping a secret for the past 3 years?" "I'd say it was about time. I've always known there was more to Angel Martinez than met the eye." "What kind of secret?" "The kind that's going to surprise a lot of people on Saturday night. Will you come? I'd like you to be there when my family finally sees who I really am." "Wouldn't miss it for the world, honey. Should I dress up fancy?" "Dress like you're going to the most elegant party of your life," I said. "Because that's exactly what it's going to be." After we hung up, I looked around my modest living room with new eyes. Everything was the same as it had been that morning, but somehow it all looked different now. The worn furniture and faded curtains weren't symbols of poverty or failure anymore. They were reminders of choices I'd made, of a life lived on my own terms rather than according to other people's expectations. Saturday was still 3 days away, but the wheels were already in motion. My son and daughter-in-law were about to learn that their assumptions about me had been catastrophically wrong. More importantly, I was about to reclaim my own sense of worth and dignity. The woman who went to bed that night was no longer the quietly suffering mother who'd accepted dismissal and disrespect. She was Angel Martinez, lottery winner, woman of means, and someone who was finally ready to demand the respect she'd always deserved. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Thursday morning arrived with an energy that seemed to pulse through every room of my modest house. I had exactly 2 days left before my birthday celebration, and there were still details to finalize. But more importantly, there were truths to prepare for sharing. I'd spent 3 years keeping my lottery win secret, and in 48 hours, that secret would transform everything. I started the day by visiting my safety deposit box at Riverside First National, a trip I made perhaps twice a year to check on documents I never thought I'd need to access quickly. The bank manager, Mrs. Peterson, greeted me with her usual polite but slightly condescending smile, the one reserved for customers with modest accounts and simple needs. "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez. Just a routine check on your box today. Actually, I need to retrieve some important documents," I said, signing the access log with steady hands. "I'm having a family gathering this weekend, and there are some things my son should know about his inheritance." Mrs. Peterson's expression shifted slightly. In a small town like Riverside, any mention of inheritance was noteworthy, especially from someone she'd always assumed lived on a fixed income. She escorted me to the vault with a bit more attention than usual. Inside box 247 lay the complete documentation of my financial transformation. The original lottery ticket, carefully preserved in a protective sleeve. copies of the claim forms and tax documents. Bank statements showing the progression from my initial winnings to the current portfolio, worth nearly $30 million after 3 years of careful investment. Property deeds for parcels of land I'd purchased quietly through my Denver attorney. Stock certificates for blue-chip companies that had performed exceptionally well under Robert Kim's guidance. But perhaps most importantly, there was a letter I'd written to myself on the day I claimed my lottery prize. In it, I'd outlined my intentions for the money, my hopes for how it might improve my life and help others, and my fears about how wealth might change the relationships I valued most. Reading it now, 3 years later, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and vindication. I'd written, "I pray that this money will reveal the true nature of the people in my life. I hope my family will love me the same regardless of my financial situation, but I fear that wealth might corrupt what we have. I'm choosing to live simply and watch carefully, to see who loves Angel the person versus Angel the millionaire." The test had lasted 3 years, and the results were heartbreaking but clear. Marcus and Jessica had failed completely, showing increasing disrespect and condescension as they became more convinced of my financial limitations. They'd dismissed my worth as a human being based on their assumptions about my bank account, but others had passed with flying colors. Betty had never treated me differently, never asked for anything, never made me feel less than worthy of friendship and respect. Rosa, my catering coordinator, had shown professionalism and kindness regardless of what she thought my budget might be. Even Helen, my event planner, had treated me with dignity when she thought I was just another client with modest means. I selected the documents I'd need for Saturday evening and carefully placed them in a leather portfolio I'd purchased that morning, specifically for this purpose. Everything was organized chronologically, from the lottery ticket dated 3 years ago to my most recent investment statements showing a portfolio that had grown to nearly $30 million. My next stop was uncharacteristic for my usual routine, but essential for what I had planned. I drove to Cherry Hills Fashion, an upscale boutique in the neighboring town of Elmwood, a place I'd never shopped before but had researched carefully. I needed an outfit that would match the venue and the occasion, something that would signal immediately that Angel Martinez was not who people thought she was. The saleswoman, a polished woman in her 40s named Claire, approached me with the kind of hesitant politeness reserved for customers whose purchasing power was questionable. My simple clothes and practical shoes clearly marked me as someone who might be browsing rather than buying. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her smile professional but guarded. "I need a complete outfit for a formal evening celebration," I said confidently. "Something elegant but age-appropriate, perhaps in navy or deep purple." Claire nodded, leading me toward a section of the store I'd only glimpsed from the window during my rare trips to Elmwood. "What price range did you have in mind?" "Quality is more important than price," I replied, enjoying the slight widening of her eyes. "I'd rather invest in something beautiful that will last than settle for something cheaper that looks inferior." The next hour was a revelation. Claire brought me dresses, jackets, and accessories I'd never imagined myself wearing. We settled on an exquisite navy silk dress with subtle beading, a matching jacket that transformed the ensemble into something worthy of a magazine cover, and elegant silver jewelry that complemented rather than competed with the outfit's sophistication. "The total comes to $1,800, Claire said, clearly watching for my reaction. I handed her my credit card without hesitation. "Perfect. I'll also need shoes and a handbag to complete the look." By the time I left Cherry Hills Fashion, I'd spent nearly $3,000 on clothes for a single evening. 3 years ago, that amount would have represented months of careful budgeting from my county clerk's pension. Now, it was less than I earned in investment returns during a typical day. But more than the money, what struck me was how differently I was treated once Claire realized I was a serious customer. Her demeanor shifted from polite caution to genuine enthusiasm, her suggestions became more creative and bold, and her respect for my opinions increased dramatically. It was a small-scale version of what I expected to happen with my family on Saturday night. Friday brought a flurry of final preparations, and an unexpected development that would make Saturday evening even more meaningful. I was reviewing seating arrangements when my phone rang with a call from Helen Blackwood. "Mrs. Martinez, I have wonderful news. Carmen Silva was so intrigued by your story that she'd like to dedicate a special song to you during her performance." She asked me to find out if there's a particular piece that holds special meaning for you. I thought immediately of the song Roberto and I had danced to at our wedding 40 years ago, The Way You Look Tonight. It had been our song throughout our marriage, something he'd hum while doing dishes or whistle while working in the garage. After his death, hearing it had always brought tears. But lately, I'd begun to remember the joy it had represented rather than just the loss. The Way You Look Tonight, I told Helen. It was my late husband's favorite song. Perfect. Carmen says she'll arrange a special interpretation that honors both the celebration and the memory. She's really looking forward to meeting you. After Helen hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about Roberto and how proud he would have been to see me finally standing up for myself. He'd always been the stronger one in our relationship, the one who spoke up when we were treated unfairly or dismissively. After his death, I'd retreated into myself, accepting poor treatment because it seemed easier than fighting. But Roberto had taught me that dignity was not something you could afford to lose, no matter how comfortable silence might seem. Angel, M.I. amor, he used to say. The moment you let people treat you as less than you are, you begin to believe them. Never let anyone make you small. I'd been making myself small for years, accepting Marcus and Jessica's condescension, allowing them to believe I was a burden rather than a blessing in their lives. Saturday night would be the end of that pattern. My afternoon was spent making final calls to confirm details. Rosa assured me that everything was prepared and that her staff would arrive at the Boulder Country Club by 4 o'clock to set up. Helen confirmed that Carmen Silva and the string quartet would arrive for sound checks at 5:30. The photographer I'd hired would be there by 5:45 to capture everything. But perhaps most importantly, I called Robert Kim to make one final financial arrangement. Mrs. Martinez, you've been quite active this week. First the $50,000 for your party, and now you're asking about establishing a charitable foundation. Are you feeling all right? I laughed at his concern. I'm feeling better than I have in years, Robert. I've decided it's time to start using my money for meaningful purposes rather than just watching it accumulate. What kind of charitable foundation did you have in mind? Something focused on supporting single mothers and elderly people who are struggling financially. I'd like to establish it with an initial funding of $5 million, with plans to add more over time. The silence on the other end was lengthy. When Robert spoke again, his voice carried a new level of respect. Mrs. Martinez, that's an incredibly generous commitment. It would be one of the largest charitable foundations established in Colorado this year. Good. I want it to make a real difference in people's lives. Can you have the preliminary paperwork ready by Monday? Absolutely. And Mrs. Martinez, I think your husband would be very proud of what you're doing. That evening, I called Betty to make sure she had everything she needed for Saturday night. She'd been uncharacteristically quiet since I'd invited her, clearly processing the implications of my sudden transformation from modest widow to woman of means. Angel, honey, I've been thinking about what you told me, about having secrets. Are you going to be okay tomorrow night? Because if your son and his wife have been treating you poorly, and they find out you've had money all along, there might be some difficult conversations. I know, Betty. But those conversations are overdue. I can't keep pretending to be poor just to spare their feelings, especially when they've made it clear that they don't respect poor Angel anyway. How much money are we talking about, if you don't mind me asking? I thought about how to answer that question. Enough that I never have to worry about anything again. Enough that I could help everyone I care about live better lives. Enough that my son's disrespect is particularly painful because it's so unnecessary. Lord have mercy, Betty whispered. And you've been sitting on this for 3 years? I wanted to see who loved me for myself versus who loved me for what I could give them. The results have been enlightening. Saturday morning, I woke before dawn, not from anxiety, but from excitement. Today was the day I would stop hiding, stop pretending, stop allowing others to define my worth based on their limited understanding of my circumstances. I spent the morning in my garden, tending to my tomatoes and herbs one last time in my old life. Tomorrow, everything would be different, not because I would suddenly become a different person, but because I would finally allow others to see who I'd been all along. At noon, I began the transformation process. I filled my bathtub with lavender-scented water and soaked while reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this moment. Roberto's death had taught me that life was unpredictable and precious. My lottery win had given me financial freedom, but also revealed uncomfortable truths about human nature. My son's dismissive behavior had pushed me to this point of decision. After my bath, I began the careful process of becoming the Angel Martinez I'd hidden for 3 years. The navy silk dress fit perfectly, transforming my appearance from modest widow to elegant woman of means. The silver jewelry caught the light beautifully, and the professional hairstylist I'd hired for the occasion had created an updo that was sophisticated but not ostentatious. When I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in years, a woman who looked worthy of respect, someone who clearly belonged in the finest venues and highest social circles. It wasn't the clothes or jewelry that made the difference, though they certainly helped. It was the posture, the confidence, the unmistakable bearing of someone who had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. At 3 o'clock, a limousine arrived at my house. I'd arranged for the luxury transportation not out of necessity but as a symbol. The modest woman who had accepted her son's cancellation of her backyard birthday party would never have hired a limousine. But the woman who was about to reclaim her dignity understood the power of presentation. As the driver held the door open for me, I caught sight of Mrs. Henderson from across the street, peeking through her curtains. By Monday morning, the entire neighborhood would be buzzing with questions about Angel Martinez and her mysterious transformation. The drive to Boulder gave me time for final reflection. In the leather portfolio beside me were documents that would shock my family and force them to confront their own assumptions and prejudices. But more than shocking them, tonight would be about honoring the woman I'd always been inside. Strong, dignified, deserving of love and respect. I thought about the guest list I'd carefully assembled. Betty would be there, representing the friendship that had never wavered, regardless of financial circumstances. Rosa and her catering staff would see the completion of a professional relationship built on mutual respect. Helen would witness the fruition of careful planning and generous spending. Carmen Silva would perform for someone who valued artistry enough to pay top dollar for excellence. And then there would be Marcus and Jessica, if they chose to come. They would see their modest, penny-pinching mother revealed as someone with the resources to command any level of luxury or respect she desired. They would have to confront the fact that their dismissive treatment had been directed not at someone who couldn't afford better, but at someone who had chosen simplicity over ostentation. The Boulder Country Club came into view as we wound through the hills outside Denver. It was exactly as elegant as I'd expected. Sprawling grounds immaculately maintained, architecture that spoke of old money and established refinement, valet parking for cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. As my limousine pulled up to the entrance, I saw other guests arriving. Carmen Silva emerged from a sleek black sedan, her presence commanding immediate attention from the club staff. The string quartet was setting up their instruments on the terrace visible through the dining room windows. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, but more importantly, I saw Marcus's Audi in the parking lot. Despite their protests and excuses, despite their claims about other commitments they had come, whether from curiosity, concern, or social obligation, my son and daughter-in-law were somewhere inside the club, probably wondering what their simple mother had gotten herself into. As the limousine driver helped me out of the car, I felt a moment of profound clarity. This evening would change everything, but it would also reveal everything. Marcus and Jessica would see who I really was, but I would also see who they really were when forced to confront their own assumptions and prejudices. The maitre d' greeted me at the entrance with the deference reserved for valued guests. "Mrs. Martinez, welcome to the Boulder Country Club. Everything is prepared exactly as you requested. Your guests have been arriving, and Miss Silva has completed her sound check. We're honored to host your celebration." As I walked through the club's elegant hallways toward the private dining room, I carried with me not just the leather portfolio full of financial documents, but the weight of 3 years of careful observation and painful realizations. Tonight, Angel Martinez would finally emerge from hiding, and everyone in my life would have to decide how they felt about the real woman they'd either loved or dismissed. The most important revelation wasn't about the money I'd won or the investments I'd made. It was about the dignity I'd always possessed, but had allowed others to overlook. Tonight, that oversight would end forever. The private dining room at the Boulder Country Club was transformed into something that belonged in a magazine spread about luxury entertaining. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables dressed in pristine white linens, each place setting featuring bone, china, sterling silver, and crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds. Towering floral arrangements of white roses and lilies created an atmosphere of understated elegance that whispered rather than shouted wealth. As I entered the room, conversations quieted and heads turned. The transformation from the modest woman my guests expected to see was so complete that several people didn't immediately recognize me. Betty stood near the champagne reception table, her mouth slightly open as she took in both my appearance and the opulent surroundings. She'd dressed beautifully for the occasion in a deep green dress I'd never seen before, but her expression suggested she was still processing the magnitude of what I'd arranged. "Angel?" she whispered as I approached. "Honey, you look absolutely stunning. But this place, this party, how did you manage all this?" Before I could answer, Rosa appeared at my elbow, her professional smile warm and genuine. "Mrs. Martinez, you look absolutely radiant. Everything is proceeding perfectly. The champagne reception is ready, and we'll begin serving the first course in approximately 30 minutes. Carmen Silva is prepared to perform whenever you'd like." I thanked Rosa and turned back to Betty, whose eyes were wide with dawning understanding. "Betty, there are some things about my life that I haven't shared with anyone. Tonight, you're going to learn who Angel Martinez really is." Across the room, I spotted Marcus and Jessica near the large windows overlooking the club's gardens. Jessica wore a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people spent on a month of groceries, her perfectly styled hair and flawless makeup creating the image of sophisticated urban success she cultivated so carefully. Marcus stood beside her in an expensive charcoal suit, but his posture was tense, his expression confused as he took in the elaborate surroundings. They were speaking in low, urgent tones, clearly trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. This wasn't the simple backyard gathering they'd dismissed so casually, nor was it the modest celebration they'd reluctantly agreed to attend. This was an event that rivaled anything in their own social circle, hosted by the mother they'd written off as an embarrassment. I made my way around the room, greeting the guests I'd carefully selected for this evening. Helen Blackwood had arrived early to oversee final details, and she introduced me to several members of Denver's social elite who had accepted last-minute invitations out of curiosity about the mysterious Angel Martinez who could afford to hire Carmen Silva on short notice. "Mrs. Martinez," said Victoria Thornton, a prominent philanthropist whose name appeared regularly in Denver's society pages. "I have to admit, when Helen told me about your celebration, I was intrigued. It's rare to meet someone new in our circles, especially someone with such exquisite taste in entertainment." I smiled graciously, playing the role of mysterious benefactor with growing confidence. "I've been rather private about my circumstances, Mrs. Thornton, but at 75, I've decided it's time to live more openly." Dr. Michael Preston, a renowned cardiac surgeon who served on several charity boards, joined our conversation. "Helen mentioned you're considering establishing a charitable foundation. That's quite an undertaking. What areas of philanthropy interest you most?" "Supporting single mothers and elderly people who are struggling," I replied without hesitation. "I believe those who have been blessed with abundance have a responsibility to help those who haven't been as fortunate." As we spoke, I noticed Marcus edging closer, clearly trying to eavesdrop on conversations that seemed to position his mother as someone far removed from the woman he thought he knew. His confusion was evident in every line of his posture, the way he kept glancing between me and the opulent surroundings, as if trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The string quartet began playing softly in the background, their selection of classical pieces creating an Evra's atmosphere of refined elegance that perfectly complemented the evening's tone. Waiters circulated with champagne and the exquisite hors d'oeuvre Rosa had prepared, each bite a small masterpiece of flavor and presentation. I excused myself from the conversation with Denver's social elite and approached my son and daughter-in-law, who had positioned themselves near the bar as if seeking liquid courage for whatever confrontation they sensed was coming. "Marcus, Jessica," I said warmly, embracing my son despite the tension radiating from his body. "I'm so glad you decided to come after all." "Mom," Marcus said, his voice strained with confusion, "what is all this? This place must have cost a fortune. The entertainment, the food, the decorations. How are you paying for this?" Jessica's eyes were sharp with suspicion as she surveyed the room. Angel, this is far beyond anything we expected. When you said you were planning something at the Boulder Country Club, we thought maybe you'd booked a small private room for a simple dinner. This looks like a society wedding. I told you I wanted something fitting for a 75th birthday, I replied calmly. Don't you think 3/4 of a century of life deserves proper recognition? But the expense, Marcus insisted, lowering his voice as other guests moved within earshot. Mom, you can't afford something like this. Your pension and Social Security don't stretch to this kind of extravagance. Are you borrowing money? Because if you are, Jessica and I need to talk to you about the financial implications. I looked at my son carefully, seeing the concern that was mixed with embarrassment and growing panic. He was genuinely worried that his mother had lost her mind and committed to expenses that would bankrupt her, but underneath that concern was something uglier. The fear that her financial irresponsibility would somehow become his problem to solve. Why don't we sit down, I suggested, indicating a quiet corner where 3 elegant chairs had been arranged around a small table. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about money. As we settled into the chairs, Jessica immediately launched into what was clearly a prepared speech. Angel, Marcus and I have been discussing your situation, and we think you need professional help managing your finances. This kind of impulsive spending suggests that you might not be thinking clearly about your limitations. What limitations would those be? I asked mildly. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. Mom, you live on a fixed income. Your house needs repairs you can't afford. Your car is 15 years old. You shop with coupons and buy generic brands. None of that behavior is consistent with someone who can afford to rent the Boulder Country Club and hire Carmen Silva. So you've been watching my spending habits, I observed. Tell me, what conclusions have you drawn about my financial situation based on those observations? Jessica's expression sharpened with what she probably thought was compassion, but looked more like condescension. We know you're struggling, Angel. There's no shame in it. Lots of elderly people find themselves in difficult financial circumstances. That's why we've been encouraging you to consider a more affordable living situation. A nursing home, you mean? A senior community, Marcus corrected quickly. Somewhere with built-in support systems and reasonable costs. Somewhere you wouldn't feel pressured to keep up appearances you can't maintain. I reached into my purse and withdrew the leather portfolio I'd brought for exactly this moment. Before we continue this conversation, I think you should see something. The first document I placed on the table was a recent bank statement showing my primary checking account balance, $847,000. Not my investment accounts, not my money market funds, just the checking account I used for everyday expenses. Marcus picked up the statement with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the numbers as if they might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. This can't be right, he whispered. This says you have almost $1 million in checking. That's just spending money, I said casually, pulling out the next set of documents. Here are my investment portfolio statements. Jessica grabbed the papers from Marcus's nerveless fingers, her face going pale as she processed the information. Page after page of stock holdings, mutual funds, bonds, and real estate investments, with a total value that climbed steadily toward $30 million. This is impossible, she breathed. These numbers, they can't be real. Angel, where did this money come from? I reached into the portfolio once more and withdrew the document I'd kept for 3 years. The one that had started everything, the lottery ticket, carefully preserved in its protective sleeve, along with the official documentation from the Colorado Lottery Commission confirming my $23 million win. 3 years ago, I bought a lottery ticket using numbers based on family birthdays and anniversaries, I said quietly. Numbers I'd been playing for 15 years. On March 15th, those numbers came up, and my life changed forever. The silence that followed was profound. Around us, the party continued with civilized conversation and gentle laughter. But at our small table, 2 people were grappling with a reality that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the world. Marcus was the first to find his voice. You won the lottery 3 years ago? Mom, why didn't you tell us? Because I wanted to see who you really were, I replied honestly. I wanted to know if you loved Angel the person, or Angel the potential inheritance? The answer became clear quite quickly. Jessica's face had cycled through several colors, finally settling on an unbecoming shade of red that clashed with her black dress. You've been testing us? For 3 years you've been pretending to be poor while we worried about your finances? While we tried to help you make responsible decisions? You tried to convince me to sell my house and move into a nursing home, I corrected. You tried to make me believe I was a burden, someone whose simple lifestyle was an embarrassment to your sophisticated friends. When did you ever offer help that was actually about helping me rather than making yourselves feel better? Marcus was still staring at the financial documents as if they might disappear. But you live so modestly. Your house, your car, your clothes. If you have this kind of money, why haven't you upgraded your lifestyle? Because I didn't need to upgrade anything to be happy, I said simply. I had a home I loved, reliable transportation, and everything necessary for a comfortable life. Why would I change that just because I could afford to? But the way you've been living, Jessica sputtered, shopping with coupons, buying generic brands, driving that old car. We thought you were struggling. No, you thought I was pathetic, I said, my voice remaining calm despite the anger building inside me. You thought your mother was a poor old woman who didn't know any better, someone whose simple tastes reflected simple thinking rather than conscious choices. The truth was settling over them like a heavy blanket, and their expressions showed the dawning realization of how badly they'd misjudged not just my financial situation, but my character. Every condescending comment, every dismissive remark, every suggestion that I needed their guidance to manage my life properly, was being recontextualized in light of the documents spread across our table. The phone call earlier this week, Marcus said slowly, when you canceled the backyard party. You were testing us then too. I gave you every opportunity to show that you valued me as a person, rather than tolerated me as an obligation, I confirmed. When you told me nobody wanted to be at my birthday celebration, when you made it clear that my 75th birthday was less important than soccer tournaments and work stress, you showed me exactly how you felt about your mother. Carmen Silva's voice suddenly filled the room as she began her first set, her rich, sultry tones wrapping around Cole Porter's "I've Got You Under My Skin," with the professional polish that commanded her substantial fees. The music provided a surreal backdrop to our intense conversation, a reminder that this was supposed to be a celebration even as family relationships were being dissected and redefined. Jessica's hands were shaking as she reached for her champagne glass. I don't understand why you felt the need to deceive us. If you had this money, we would have treated you differently. Exactly, I said, the single word carrying the weight of 3 years of careful observation. You would have treated me differently because of my bank account, not because you'd suddenly developed respect for who I am as a person. That's precisely the problem. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his face a study in confusion and dawning comprehension. So all those times we suggested you move somewhere nicer, all our concerns about your finances. All your concerns were based on assumptions you never bothered to verify, I finished. You decided I was poor and pathetic, and you treated me accordingly. It never occurred to you to actually ask about my financial situation, or to consider that I might be choosing simplicity rather than being forced into it. The arrival of Rosa with the first course provided a momentary interruption, but the tension at our table was palpable. Other guests were beginning to notice that something significant was happening in our corner, though the elegant surroundings and background music maintained the veneer of civilized celebration. Mrs. Martinez, Rosa said quietly, would you like me to delay the dinner service while you finish your conversation? No, thank you, Rosa. We can continue talking while we eat. I turned back to Marcus and Jessica, who were still processing the financial documents. I think it's time you understood the full scope of what you've been dismissing. I pulled out additional papers, documents, showing the charitable foundation I'd established just that morning. I've decided to use my resources for meaningful purposes. This foundation will provide support for single mothers and elderly people facing financial hardship. The initial funding is $5 million. Jessica's eyes widened further. $5 million? Angel, that's more money than most people see in a lifetime. It's also less than I make in investment returns during a typical quarter, I said matter-of-factly. Wealth brings responsibility, and I intend to use mine to help people who are facing the kinds of struggles you assumed I was dealing with. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, apparently processing not just the financial revelations but their broader implications. When he finally spoke, his voice was subdued. "Mom, I feel like I don't know you at all." "You know exactly who I am," I replied. "I'm the same woman who raised you, who worked 2 jobs to pay for your college applications, who taught you the value of hard work and treating people with respect. The only thing that's changed is your perception of my bank account." "But why keep it secret for so long?" he asked. "Why put us through 3 years of worrying about your finances?" "Because I needed to know who you really were," I said simply. "I needed to see how you'd treat someone you believed had limited resources and no power to change your life." The results were enlightening. Carmen Silva finished her first song to enthusiastic applause from the other guests, many of whom were clearly impressed by the caliber of entertainment. She caught my eye and smiled, preparing for the special song she'd arranged in honor of my late husband. As the opening notes of "The Way You Look Tonight" filled the room, I felt Roberto's presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside me. "This song," I said quietly, "was your father's favorite. He used to say that true wealth wasn't about money, but about being surrounded by people who loved you for who you were, rather than what you could provide for them." The music wrapped around us as Rosa and her staff began serving the elegant first course, but Marcus and Jessica seemed to have lost their appetites. They sat in stunned silence, occasionally glancing at the financial documents as if hoping they might reveal different numbers upon closer inspection. "I need some air," Jessica said suddenly, standing from the table with unsteady movements. "This is all too much to process." She walked toward the terrace doors, leaving Marcus and me alone for the first time in years without the buffer of his wife's presence. He looked older somehow, as if the revelations of the evening had aged him in real time. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm ashamed of how we've treated you, but I'm also confused about why you felt you needed to test us this way." "Because love shouldn't be conditional on financial status," I replied. "If you could only respect me when you thought I was wealthy, then you never really respected me at all." "That's not fair. We always loved you." "Did you? Or did you love the idea of having a mother who didn't embarrass you?" "Because there's a difference, Marcus." "A significant one." Carmen Silva transitioned into the special arrangement of Roberto's favorite song, her interpretation tender and haunting. Around the room, conversations quieted as guests recognized they were witnessing something deeply personal and moving. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a tribute to love that had endured beyond death. As the music filled the space between us, Marcus finally began to understand the full magnitude of what had transpired. His mother hadn't just revealed her financial status, she'd exposed the conditional nature of his love and respect. The test had lasted 3 years, and he'd failed it completely. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely audible above Carmen's singing. "Now you decide who you want to be going forward," I said. "You can choose to see this as a betrayal, or you can choose to see it as an opportunity to build a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than assumptions and condescension." "And if I choose wrong?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised with such hope and pride, and felt a complex mixture of love and disappointment. "Then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices, just as I've had to live with the consequences of mine." The song ended to thunderous applause, and Carmen Silva raised her glass in a toast to love that transcends all boundaries. The gesture felt symbolic, a benediction for the evening's revelations, and the relationships that would need to be rebuilt in their aftermath. As dessert was served and the evening moved toward its conclusion, Marcus and Jessica sat in contemplative silence, processing revelations that would reshape their understanding of family, respect, and the true nature of wealth. The woman they'd dismissed as an embarrassment had revealed herself as someone who possessed not just financial resources, but the wisdom to use those resources meaningfully. The turning point had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following my 75th birthday celebration unfolded like the turning of a kaleidoscope, each day bringing new patterns and perspectives that reshaped everything I thought I knew about family, respect, and the courage to live authentically. The morning after the party, I woke in my modest bedroom on Maple Street, feeling lighter than I had in years, as if I'd finally set down a burden I'd been carrying for too long. My phone had been ringing constantly since I'd returned home the night before. Marcus had called 4 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails asking if we could talk. Jessica had sent 3 text messages, each one more conciliatory than the last. But I wasn't ready for those conversations yet. I needed time to process what had happened and decide how I wanted to move forward. Instead, I made coffee in my familiar kitchen and sat in my garden, watching the morning sun illuminate the tomato plants Roberto and I had planted together so many seasons ago. The contrast between this simple moment and the opulent celebration of the night before wasn't jarring anymore. Both were equally valid. Expressions of who I was. A woman who could appreciate luxury but found joy in simplicity. Someone who had the resources to command respect but preferred to earn it through kindness and authenticity. Betty arrived at 9 o'clock, as I'd known she would. She carried a plate of her famous blueberry muffins and wore an expression of barely contained curiosity, mixed with something that looked like pride. "Angel Martinez," she said, settling into the chair across from me at my kitchen table. "You are full of surprises. I've been your friend for 20 years, and I had no idea you were sitting on a fortune that could fund a small country." I laughed, feeling the lightness that came with no longer having to hide or pretend. It wasn't a fortune when I won it, just more money than I'd ever imagined having. The investments made it grow into something significant. $23 million, Angel. That's not significant. That's life-changing. For you, for your family, for everyone whose life you choose to touch with that kind of generosity. The money doesn't change who I am, Betty. I'm still the same woman who shops with coupons because waste bothers me, who drives an old car because it runs perfectly well, who finds more satisfaction in a homegrown tomato than in anything money can buy. Betty studied my face carefully. But it changes how other people see you, how your son sees you. That's the problem, isn't it? If Marcus can only respect me when he knows I'm wealthy, then he never really knew me at all. Over the next hour, Betty helped me process the events of the previous evening. She'd watched the confrontation with Marcus and Jessica from across the room, seen their faces as they absorbed the reality of my financial situation. More importantly, she'd observed how the other guests responded to me once they understood I was someone of substance rather than just Betty's modest friend from Riverside. "People treated you differently," she observed. "Not just Marcus and Jessica, but everyone. The way they listened when you spoke, the way they made space for you in conversations. It was like watching someone flip a switch." "That's exactly what it was like," I agreed. "And it's why I kept the secret for so long. I needed to know who would love Angel the person versus Angel the millionaire. And now you know. Now I know." By noon, I could no longer avoid the inevitable conversation with my son. When he called for the 5th time, I answered, "Mom, thank God, I've been worried sick. We need to talk about last night." "Yes, we do, but not over the phone. If you want to have this conversation, you'll need to come here, to my home, and sit at my kitchen table like family should." There was a pause. "Jessica thinks we should meet somewhere neutral, maybe a restaurant." "Jessica can think whatever she likes, but this conversation happens here or not at all. I'm done accommodating other people's comfort at the expense of my own dignity." Marcus arrived 2 hours later, alone. Jessica, he explained, needed more time to process everything and wasn't ready to face me yet. He looked exhausted, as if he'd spent the entire night wrestling with revelations that had turned his world upside down. "Mom, I don't even know where to begin. I feel like I've been living in some kind of alternate reality where I thought I knew who you were, but I was completely wrong about everything." I poured him coffee in the same chipped mug I'd been using for 15 years, a deliberate choice that reinforced the continuity between the woman he'd always known and the woman he was just beginning to understand. "You weren't wrong about who I am, Marcus. You were wrong about what defined my worth. I'm still the same mother who packed your lunch every day for 12 years, who worked double shifts to pay for your college applications, who taught you that character matters more than circumstances." "But the money, Mom!" $23 million. How could you keep something that huge a secret for 3 years? "Because I needed to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer except love and companionship." The results were heartbreaking but educational. Marcus set down his coffee cup with shaking hands. "I know how we treated you was wrong. The things we said, the way we dismissed your feelings, the assumption that we knew what was best for your life. I'm ashamed of all of it. Ashamed enough to change? I asked quietly. I want to change. I want to be the son you deserve. But I don't know how to get past the fact that you tested us, that you let us make fools of ourselves for 3 years while you watched and judged. I leaned back in my chair, considering how to explain something that had taken me years to understand myself. Marcus, when your father was dying, he made me promise something. He said, Angel, when I'm gone, don't let people make you small. Don't let them treat you as less than you are, just because it's easier than demanding respect. I kept that promise for a while after he died, but then I got tired of fighting, tired of standing up for myself. I let you and Jessica make me small because it seemed easier than confronting the truth about how you saw me. We never meant to make you feel small. Intent doesn't matter as much as impact, Mijo. When you canceled my birthday party and told me nobody wanted to be there, when you suggested I move to a nursing home because my house wasn't good enough for your standards, when you treated every conversation like you were humoring a confused old woman, the impact was that I felt worthless and unloved. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee as if it might hold answers to questions he was only beginning to formulate. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. What can I do to fix this? How do I prove that I can love you for who you are rather than what you have? You start by accepting that the woman sitting across from you is exactly the same person she's always been. My bank account didn't change my values, my character, or my capacity for love. If you can respect wealthy Angel, then you should have been able to respect modest Angel too. And if I can't get past the fact that you tested us? I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses from weekend yard work that reminded me he was still the boy I'd raised to value honest labor. Then you'll have to decide whether your pride is more important than your relationship with your mother. Because I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not, to make other people comfortable. Over the following weeks, Marcus began the difficult process of rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of honesty, rather than assumptions. He came to dinner every Sunday, sitting at my worn kitchen table, and slowly learning to see the woman who had always been there beneath the modest exterior he'd dismissed. Sometimes Jessica came with him, though she struggled more with accepting that her judgment had been so fundamentally flawed. The children, Emma and Tyler, adapted with the resilience of youth. When I took them shopping for school clothes, at stores they'd never been able to afford before, they were delighted by the experience, but didn't treat me differently because of it. Their love had always been unconditional, untainted by the adult concerns about status and appearances that had poisoned their parents' perception of me. My relationship with the broader community underwent its own transformation. Word spread quickly through Riverside about Angel Martinez's secret wealth, but the reactions were more varied than I'd expected. Some neighbors seemed awed by the revelation, treating me with a deference that felt uncomfortable and unnecessary. Others, like Betty, simply incorporated the new information into their existing understanding of who I was, without fundamentally changing how they interacted with me. Mrs. Henderson from across the street began waving more enthusiastically when she saw me in my garden, and the young couple next door suddenly discovered they needed to borrow sugar more frequently than before. But the mailman Jerry still stopped to chat about the Morden, weather, and Rosa from the church charity drive continued treating me with the same warm professionalism she'd always shown. The charitable foundation I'd established became a source of unexpected joy and purpose. Working with Robert Kim and a team of nonprofit specialists, I developed programs that provided scholarships for single mothers pursuing education, supported elderly people struggling with medical expenses, and funded community gardens in underserved neighborhoods. The work gave me a sense of meaning that went far beyond personal satisfaction. 3 months after my birthday celebration, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I sold my house on Maple Street. But instead of moving to a mansion or luxury condominium, as people expected, I bought a comfortable ranch-style home in a neighborhood where working families were raising children, and older residents were aging in place with dignity. The house was larger than my previous home but not ostentatious, with enough space for family gatherings and a garden where I could continue growing the vegetables that connected me to Roberto's memory. Marcus helped me move, carrying boxes with a care and attention that demonstrated how much our relationship had improved. As we unpacked dishes in my new kitchen, he asked the question I'd been expecting. "Mom, with all your resources, why didn't you buy something grander? You could afford any house in Colorado." "Because grand doesn't necessarily mean happy," I replied, arranging my mismatched plates in the cabinet with the same care I'd given them for 15 years. I wanted a home that felt like home, not a monument to wealth I never asked for. But people will expect you to live differently now that they know about the money. Then people will be disappointed. I didn't spend 75 years figuring out who I am just to change because other people have expectations about how wealthy women should behave. The first Christmas in my new home was a revelation. Marcus and Jessica brought the children for a week-long visit, and for the first time in years we felt like a real family again. I cooked traditional meals using recipes my grandmother had taught me, and we played board games and watched old movies just as we had when Marcus was young. On Christmas morning, I gave Marcus and Jessica an envelope containing the deed to a small cabin in the mountains, a place where they could take the children for vacations and create the kind of family memories that money couldn't buy but resources could facilitate. Jessica cried when she opened it, and for the first time since my birthday party, her tears seemed genuinely connected to gratitude rather than shock or confusion. "Angel, this is too much," she whispered. "It's exactly enough," I corrected. Family takes care of family, but not by diminishing themselves to make others comfortable. This gift comes from love, not obligation. As winter turned to spring, I found myself thinking often about Roberto and what he would have made of the journey I'd taken. He'd always been proud of my strength, but worried about my tendency to put others' comfort before my own dignity. I thought he would have approved of the way I'd finally learned to demand the respect I deserved, while using my resources to help others. On a warm afternoon in May, almost a year after my 75th birthday, I sat in my new garden watching Emma and Tyler play, while Marcus and Jessica prepared dinner inside. The children's laughter, mixed with the sounds of family conversation, creating the soundtrack of a life well lived. My phone buzzed with a text from Betty, who was traveling with a senior group to Europe, a trip I'd quietly funded for several church members who'd never been able to afford international travel. The message was simple but profound. "Thinking of you and grateful for the friendship that never changed, even when everything else did." That evening, as my family gathered around my new dining room table, Marcus raised his glass in a toast to Mom, who taught us that dignity isn't about having money but about knowing your worth, regardless of what's in your bank account. Jessica added her own words, "and to learning that love should never be conditional on anything except the willingness to see people as they truly are." As we clinked glasses, I felt Roberto's presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside me. The test that had lasted 3 years was finally over, and everyone had passed in their own way. Marcus and Jessica had learned to value substance over appearances. The children had learned that generosity springs from love rather than obligation, and I had learned that hiding my light under a bushel served no one. The lottery ticket that had changed my life 3 years earlier had given me more than financial security. It had given me the opportunity to discover who truly loved me, and the courage to demand that love be offered with respect. Most importantly, it had taught me that true wealth lay not in the numbers on a bank statement, but in the relationships built on honesty, mutual respect, and unconditional love. That night, as I prepared for bed in my comfortable new home, I looked out the window at stars that seemed brighter than they had in years. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to use my resources wisely, to love my family authentically, and to live as the woman I'd always been inside. Angel Martinez, lottery winner, philanthropist, mother, and someone who had finally learned that the most valuable thing she possessed was her own sense of worth. The woman who fell asleep that night was wealthy in every way that mattered, surrounded by love that had been tested and proven genuine, ready for whatever adventures the future might bring. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.